Merlin. Around 1150 AD in the forest of Brocéliande in Brittany, nearly 170-year-old Merlin vanished after being betrayed by his own student. His body was never recovered, and to this day, nobody knows where or even whether Merlin is actually buried. His chocolate frog card simply reads, medieval dates unknown. Merlin was the most famous wizard of all time. Born around 982, he was one of the very first students at Hogwarts, sorted into Slytherin. He was a charm specialist, a gifted seer, and was known as the Prince of Enchanters. After Hogwarts, he joined the court of King Arthur, and the Order of Merlin was later named in his honor to protect Muggles from magical abuse. A Slytherin championing Muggle rights centuries before Voldemort turned the house into a brand for blood supremacy and noselessness. Fun fact, King Arthur supposedly lived in the 5th century, but Hogwarts wasn't founded until the 990s. Some theorize Merlin used a time turner or aged backwards, making his actual lifespan basically impossible to calculate. Classic Merlin. According to Muggle legend, his ending was nothing heroic. His own student, a sorceress named Nimue, learned everything he could teach her and then turned his own magic against him, trapping him forever in the forest. Some say it was a cave, others say a tree, others describe an invisible tower with no walls. The details change depending on who's telling the story, but the ending stays the same. Nimue locked Merlin away and walked out of the forest alone. 1,000 years later, his name is both an award Cornelius Fudge gave to himself and a swear word teenagers shout when they're late to potions. Merlin's beard. Speaking of unpredictable legacies, three brothers once tried to cheat death itself, and it went exactly as badly as you'd expect. Antioch Peverell. Around 1240 AD, somewhere in England, roughly 30-year-old Antioch Peverell had his throat slit where he slept. The most powerful wand in the world was gone. He'd had it for days. Antioch was the eldest of three Peverell brothers, the ones from the Tale of the Three Brothers. The bedtime story every wizarding kid grows up hearing. Three brothers outsmart death, each gets a reward. Antioch, a combative man, asked for a wand more powerful than any in existence. Dumbledore believed the brothers probably crafted the Hallows themselves. But either way, Antioch got exactly what he wanted. And here's the part nobody talks about. He found a wizard he'd been feuding with, dueled him, killed him. The Elder Wand worked perfectly. Then Antioch did what any responsible owner of the most dangerous weapon in wizarding history would do. He walked into an inn, got drunk, and bragged about it to a room full of strangers. That same night, a wizard who'd been listening crept upstairs to Antioch's room, stole the wand, and slit his throat. The man who asked death for the ultimate weapon couldn't even survive his own victory party. Antioch was buried somewhere in England. His grave, if it still exists, has never been identified. The Elder Wand passed to his killer, then to the next, then to the next. Its ownership history reads like a true crime podcast that never ends. Centuries later, that same wand would pass through the hands of Grindelwald, Dumbledore, and eventually a noseless Dark Lord who still couldn't make it work. His brother asked death for something quieter. Somehow, that went even worse. Cadmus Peverell. Around 1243 AD, in his own home somewhere in England, Cadmus Peverell, the middle brother believed to be in his late 20s, took his own life. The resurrection stone was still in his hand. Where Antioch was combative, Cadmus was arrogant. When death offered each brother a reward, Cadmus asked for the power to bring back the dead. Because apparently outsmarting death once wasn't enough. He wanted to humiliate him too. Death picked up a stone from the riverbank, and the resurrection stone was born. Honestly, Death must have been thrilled with that request. Cadmus had been engaged to a woman he loved deeply. She died before they could marry. Either way, Cadmus returned home alone, turned the stone 3 times in his hand, and she appeared. But she wasn't really back. She was cold, distant, and sad. A veil still separated them, as if she belonged to a world he couldn't reach. Cadmus watched the woman he loved stand in front of him and somehow still be completely gone. It drove him mad. Cadmus killed himself to truly join her. Centuries later, Dumbledore nearly made the same mistake. The stone passed down through generations and eventually ended up in far worse hands. And yes, that means Tom Riddle. So the youngest brother asked death for something far simpler. It's the only request that worked. Ignotus Peverell. On the 19th of May, 1292 in Godric's Hollow, 77-year-old Ignotus Peverell quietly died at home, surrounded by his family. Sounds peaceful, but the story behind and it is anything but ordinary. Ignotus was the youngest and wisest of the 3 Peverell brothers. When Death offered each of them a reward, Ignotus asked for a way to leave without anyone following him. Death gave him his own invisibility cloak, and Ignotus did something neither of his brothers managed. He went home and lived. He raised a family, stayed out of trouble, and wore the cloak for decades without ever bragging about it. He simply existed quietly while Death waited. When he finally reached old age 77, which honestly isn't even that old by wizarding standards, he made his choice. He passed the cloak to his son and walked toward Death willingly. The tale says he greeted Death as an equal, like meeting a friend he hadn't seen in years. Ignotus was buried in the churchyard at Godric's Hollow, the same village where he was born. His gravestone, worn nearly unreadable by 7 centuries of weather, still carries the symbol of the Deathly Hallows. Fun fact, centuries earlier, Harry Potter stood at that grave on Christmas Eve 1997. No idea he was looking at his own bloodline. The cloak had been his inheritance all along. Now, let's talk about someone whose ending broke a mother's heart. Rowena Ravenclaw. Sometime in the early 11th century at Hogwarts Castle in Scotland, Rowena Ravenclaw died of a fatal illness in the building she helped create. Legend says the real cause was a broken heart. Honestly, once I hear the full story, that tracks. Rowena was one of the 4 founders of Hogwarts, the most brilliant witch of her age. She invented the castle's ever-changing floor plan, which explains why first years still get lost on the way to charms. Her most prized possession was an enchanted diadem said to enhance the wisdom of whoever wore it. Here's the real gossip though. Her daughter Helena grew jealous of Rowena's fame, stole the diadem and fled to Albania. Rowena told no one. She hid her daughter's betrayal even from the other founders, pretending the diadem was still in her possession. Then she fell fatally ill. Knowing she was dying, she sent the Bloody Baron, a Slytherin wizard obsessively in love with Helena, to bring her daughter home. She just wanted to see her one last time. Nobody came back. Not the Baron, not Helena, not the diadem. Rowena died at Hogwarts without ever learning what happened in that forest. The most brilliant witch of her age brought down by something no spell could fix. What actually happened to Helena? That's a whole different kind of tragedy. Helena Ravenclaw. Sometime in the early 11th century in a forest in Albania, Helena Ravenclaw, believed to be in her 20s, was stabbed to death by the man her mother had sent to save her. Helena wanted to be more brilliant than the woman who co-founded an entire school, so she took the diadem and ran as far as she could. When she heard the Baron crashing through the trees toward her, she hid inside a hollow tree. The Baron demanded she come home. She refused. He snapped. Furious at her refusal, he stabbed her. The moment he saw what he'd done, he turned the knife on himself. 2 bodies in the Albanian forest, the diadem hidden in a tree. Nobody back at Hogwarts knew where any of them were, which is why this part hurts. The man Rowena trusted to bring her daughter home is the one who killed her. Both returned to Hogwarts as ghosts. She became the Grey Lady. He became the Bloody Baron, still wearing chains and her silver blood. Technically, he did bring her back to her mother's castle, just not in the condition Rowena had in mind. Centuries later, a young Tom Riddle charmed Helena into revealing the diadem's location. Turns out her judgment in men was consistently terrible. He turned it into a Horcrux, Rowena's masterpiece, holding a piece of the darkest soul in wizarding history. Now, let's talk about a wizard whose wand left a trail of blood long before it got a famous owner. Emerick the Evil. Sometime in the early Middle Ages, somewhere in southern England, Emerick the Evil was slaughtered in a duel by a wizard named Egbert the Egregious. The death was described as gruesome. The Elder Wand changed hands once again. Emerick was a short-lived but exceptionally aggressive dark wizard who terrorized the south of England for years. He was the first historically documented master of the Elder Wand, after Antioch Peverell's anonymous killer, which means somewhere between those 2 owners, the wand's trail goes completely cold. How Emerick got it is anyone's guess. What he did with it is not. He used it to attack, dominate, and terrify anyone in his path. Quick note, Hogwarts first year study Emerick in history of magic, and most of them mix him up with Uric the Oddball. One terrorized southern England, the other wore a jellyfish as a hat. Easy to confuse. Only one of them had a body count. Then came Egbert the Egregious. The 2 fought what's described as a ferocious duel, and Egbert won. That makes Egbert one of only 2 wizards in recorded history to defeat a master of the Elder Wand in fair fight. The other was Dumbledore. So, either Egbert was extraordinarily powerful or Emerick was extraordinarily overconfident. Probably both. What happened to Egbert after? Nobody knows. He disappeared from record entirely. The wand resurfaced about a century later in the hands of someone far more interested in studying dark magic than casting it. Godelot, sometime around the late Middle Ages in his own home somewhere in England. Godelot, a dark wizard of unknown age, starved to death in his own cellar. The door was locked from the outside by his own son. Godelot was what Dumbledore described as an unpleasant character. He came into possession of the Elder Wand roughly a century after Egbert the Egregious, though how he got it remains a mystery. But unlike the owners before him, Godelot wasn't interested in conquest or terrorizing villages. He was a researcher. He treated the Elder Wand like a teacher, referring to it as my most wicked and subtle friend, with body of Elhorn, who knows ways of magic most evil. Basically, he was having full conversations with his wand. Classic dark wizard behavior. The research produced Magic Most Evil, one of the most dangerous books in wizarding history. It documented advanced dark magic in terrifying detail, though even Godelot drew a line somewhere. He barely mentioned Horcruxes, refusing to go into detail. Centuries later, a young Tom Riddle found the book anyway, used it as a foundation and hunted down the rest on his own. Godelot's own ending, though, came from closer to home. His son Hereward wanted the Elder Wand. Hereward chose a far simpler method. He locked Godelot in his own cellar, took the wand, and left him there to die. The wizard who spent his life studying the darkest magic imaginable was killed by a locked door and an empty room. The Elder Wand moved on. It always does. But let's leave the wand's story for now and talk about someone whose death was a mystery for centuries until it wasn't. Loxias. Sometime in the 18th century, in an unknown location, the dark wizard Loxias was killed. By whom? Nobody knows for sure. According to Dumbledore, many people claim to have finished him off, including his own mother. Classic. Loxias got the Elder Wand by murdering its previous owner, Barnabas Deverell, a fearsome warlock who had carved out a terrifying reputation with the wand in the early 1700s. Loxias killed him, took the wand, and immediately gave it a new name, the Deathstick, which tells you everything you need to know about his personality. He used it to destroy anyone who displeased him, which based on the body count was apparently everyone. Here's the embarrassing part though. Loxias was so universally hated that when he finally died, people were lining up to take credit. Multiple wizards claimed they'd done it. His own mother put her name on that list. Whether she actually killed her son or just wanted the bragging rights is unclear, but either way, that's a family dinner conversation nobody's recovering from. According to Xenophilius Lovegood, the most likely candidates were two wizards named Arcus and Livius, but even Lovegood couldn't say for sure what happened next. Now, let's talk about someone whose relationship with death was, let's just say, a bit complicated. Nicholas Flamel. In 1992, somewhere in England, approximately 665-year-old Nicholas Flamel died alongside his wife, Perenelle. It sounds simple. In the wizarding world, it wasn't. Flamel was an alchemist born around 1326 who achieved what every wizard in history had dreamed about. He created the Philosopher's Stone, the only known object capable of producing the elixir of life, a potion that makes its drinker immortal for as long as they kept taking it. Flamel and his wife Perenelle drank it for over 600 years. Fun fact, Dumbledore's chocolate frog card mentions him as an alchemy partner. That's how Harry, Ron, and Hermione figured out what Fluffy was guarding in their first year. But in 1992, Dumbledore and Flamel agreed that the stone had to be destroyed. Voldemort, through Professor Quirrell and the back of his head, because apparently that's where you store Dark Lords, was trying to steal it. The risk was too great. Flamel understood. He and Perenelle had enough elixir stored to set their affairs in order, and then they let go. Dumbledore later told Harry that for Flamel, death was like going to bed after a very, very long day. After 665 years, honestly, that sounds about right. Now, a wizard who had held Europe hostage for decades, all for the greater good. Gellert Grindelwald. In March 1998, in the topmost cell of Nurmengard prison in Austria, approximately 115-year-old Gellert Grindelwald was killed by Lord Voldemort with a single killing curse. He was unarmed, wandless, and had been locked in that cell for 53 years. He defied Voldemort to the end. Grindelwald was born around 1883, expelled from Durmstrang at 16 for dark experiments, and landed in Godric's Hollow, where he met a young Albus Dumbledore. The two were brilliant, ambitious, and in love. Yes, in love. Hope that's not news to ya. They dreamed up a wizard-led world order under the slogan, for the greater good. Then a duel went wrong. Dumbledore's sister Ariana was killed, and nobody ever found found out whose spell did it. Grindelwald fled. He stole the Elder Wand from Wandmaker Grigorovich, built an army, and terrorized Europe for decades from Nurmengard Castle, a fortress he built as both headquarters and prison, with "for the greater good" carved above the entrance. In 1945, Dumbledore finally confronted him in what witnesses called the greatest duel ever fought. Dumbledore won. Grindelwald was locked in his own prison under his own slogan. 53 years later, Voldemort broke into Nurmengard looking for the Elder Wand. Grindelwald, old skeletal, completely defenseless, refused to tell him where it was. He taunted Voldemort by name. He told him the wand would never be his. Some say he'd found remorse in those 53 years. Others say he was protecting Dumbledore's tomb. Either way, he welcomed death. And now, let's talk about the wizard without whom this list wouldn't exist. Albus Dumbledore. On June 30th, 1997, on the Astronomy Tower at Hogwarts, 115-year-old Albus Dumbledore was killed by Severus Snape, and every student below watched him fall. So, Dumbledore was born in 1881 and was, by nearly every account, the greatest wizard of modern times. His chocolate frog card lists 3 achievements: defeating Grindelwald in 1945, discovering the 12 uses of dragon's blood, and his alchemical work with Nicholas Flamel, headmaster of Hogwarts, holder of the Order of Merlin First Class, and owner of more titles than most wizards have socks. Basically, if the wizarding world had a resume, his wouldn't even fit on one page. But here's the real gossip. His death wasn't murder, it was a plan. A year earlier, Dumbledore had put on Marvolo Gaunt's ring, desperate to see his dead sister Ariana. It was a Horcrux, and the curse gave him about a year to live. He spent that year planning his own death, and with Snape, down to the exact moment. The idea was simple and terrible. Snape would kill Dumbledore to spare Draco, protect Snape's cover, and ensure the Elder Wand's power died with its owner. The plan worked, mostly. What Dumbledore didn't account for was Draco disarming him moments before Snape arrived, which quietly transferred the wand's allegiance without anyone realizing it. He arranged his own death to protect a student, preserve his spy, and try to end the power of the Elder Wand. So yeah, 12 witches and wizards and one wand that outlasted them all. Let's talk about all 14 masters of the Elder Wand explained. That's your next lesson here at Stickman Hogwarts. Click now before someone thinks you're the new owner and starts asking questions.